He sits in his car every night before walking into the house. Not because he's tired, not because he's angry, but because he needs 5 minutes of silence before stepping back into a life that no longer feels like his. He looks at the front door, the same door he once opened with excitement. Now it feels heavy. It used to lead to warmth, laughter, a kiss at the end of a long day. Now it's the door to expectations, into conversations that don't mean anything, to a kind of loneliness that lives in company. He used to think that was normal, that this is just what marriage becomes after years. But deep down, something in him knows this isn't peace. It's survival. Most men won't say it out loud, but they know this feeling. That quiet exhaustion that doesn't show on your face but weighs on your chest. The kind of tired that sleep can't fix. He works. He provides. He shows up. But the more he gives, the less he's seen. And the less he's seen, the quieter he becomes. It doesn't happen all at once. A man doesn't wake up broken. He fades slowly, one compromise at a time, one swallowed word at a time, until one day, he realizes his silence has become his only way to keep the peace. He tells himself he's doing it for the family, for the kids, for the mortgage, for stability. But every time he chooses silence over truth, a small part of him disappears. He remembers when his voice used to matter, when his opinion could shift the room. Now, he measures every sentence, every tone, every look, because he knows one wrong word can turn the night into a war. He's learned that peace costs less than honesty, so he pays the price every day. Quietly, the world sees him as stable, reliable, the man who holds everything together. But what they don't see is the cost, the parts of himself he's traded for harmony. He doesn't tell anyone about the nights he sits awake staring at the ceiling, wondering when he stopped being a husband and started being an obligation. He doesn't talk about how he feels invisible in his own home. He doesn't admit that sometimes he drives the long way home, just to have a few more minutes of calm before the noise starts again. Men don't talk about it, not because they don't feel, but because no one listens. And when no one listens, silence becomes the only language left. He remembers when his wife used to look at him with respect. Now, she looks at him with expectations. The way you look at someone who's supposed to fix things, supposed to carry things, supposed to never break. That's what happens when a man becomes the pillar of everything. He forgets he's also made of bones. He used to be funny. He used to laugh. Now he watches his words like a soldier checking for mines. Every conversation feels like strategy, not connection. He calls it patience. But it's not patience. It's fear disguised as maturity. He tells himself he's doing the right thing. That keeping quiet keeps the peace. But peace built on silence is a slow form of death. Every time he swallows his truth, he loses a little more of who he is. He becomes careful, predictable, safe, but inside, he's suffocating. And the cruel part is, no one notices. Because to everyone else, he looks fine. He's paying the bills. He's showing up. He's doing what a man is supposed to do. But the truth is, he's fading in plain sight. No one teaches men how to speak when they're not being heard. They only teach them how to endure, how to absorb, how to keep going. And so he does, day after day, year after year, until endurance becomes his identity. He forgets what it's like to feel understood. He forgets what it's like to be chosen, not needed. He forgets that silence is not strength, it's surrender. Some nights, he looks in the mirror and barely recognizes the man staring back. His body is older, his eyes are tired, and his heart feels like it's been running a marathon that never ends. He doesn't know when it started. Maybe it was the first time he apologized for something that wasn't his fault. Maybe it was the night she rolled over instead of saying goodnight. Maybe it was when he stopped trying to explain how he felt because he already knew she wouldn't understand. He told himself that's just marriage. That's just what happens when you grow up. But deep down, he knows better. This isn't maturity. It's submission. He doesn't hate her. He doesn't even blame her. He just misses himself. The man he used to be before peace became performance, before love became labor, and the saddest part is, no one ever told him he was allowed to leave, not the marriage, but the silence. Because men are taught that silence is noble, that restraint is strength, that patience will save the family. But they were never told that patience without expression is poison. He sits there again tonight, in his car, engine off, keys in his hand, 5 minutes of quiet before stepping back into the noise. He takes a deep breath and wonders, how many more years can a man live like this before he stops living at all? The silence was supposed to protect him. It was supposed to keep the peace. But peace built on silence is not peace. It's surrender. He told himself he was being patient, that this was what good men do. Good men endure. Good men provide. Good men sacrifice. But no one ever warned him that constant sacrifice turns a man into a ghost in his own life. He kept showing up, kept trying, kept doing everything right. But the more he gave, the more invisible he became. It wasn't anger that broke him. It was indifference. He could handle conflict. He could handle pain. But what he couldn't handle was feeling unnecessary, like his presence made no difference, like he was just another piece of furniture in a home that used to be filled with love. He started noticing the little things, the way she no longer touched him, the way her tone changed when she spoke his name, the way she smiled at her phone but not at him. He told himself it was stress, that it was just a phase, but deep down, he knew. She was gone long before she ever left. The hardest part wasn't losing intimacy. It was realizing that intimacy had become a weapon. She used it to control, to correct, to remind him who had the power. And he let her. Because the alternative was another argument he didn't have the energy to fight. You can live in the same house, sleep in the same bed, raise the same kids, and still feel completely alone. He began to understand something he had never been taught. Men don't cheat for adventure. They cheat for acknowledgement, for the feeling of being seen again, for a moment when someone actually looks at them and says, I see you. But most men don't even cross that line. They just internalize it. They die quietly while performing the role the world expects of them. He tried therapy, but therapy taught him how to tolerate the pain, not how to heal it. He learned new words like boundaries and communication. But what he really needed was honesty from both sides. And honesty doesn't survive where truth is punished. So he stayed quiet, because silence, at least, didn't start another war. He began to change without realizing it. He smiled less, laughed less, stopped going out with friends, stopped doing the things that made him feel alive. And when she finally said, You're not the man I married, he didn't argue, because she was right. He wasn't. That man had been buried under years of compromise, under years of pretending everything was fine, under years of carrying a family that stopped believing in him. He used to think love was about endurance. Now he knows endurance without respect is slavery. The truth is, most married men don't want to leave. They want to be heard. They want to be seen. They want to feel like their effort still matters. But somewhere along the way, effort became expectation. And love turned into labor. He doesn't hate her. He doesn't hate marriage. He hates what silence did to him, how it took his voice and replaced it with compliance, how it taught him that keeping peace means losing himself. He remembers sitting at the dinner table one night. The kids were laughing. She was scrolling through her phone, and he realized he hadn't said a word in 20 minutes. Not because he had nothing to say, but because he knew no one was listening. That was the night he felt something inside him snap. Not with rage, but with realization. He had spent years trying to save something that no longer wanted to be saved. Years trying to fix a connection that was already unplugged. He learned that love without respect will drain you faster than hate ever could, and that a man who loses his voice will eventually lose his will. He looked in the mirror later that night. For a moment, he didn't see a husband or a father. He saw a man who had survived his own silence, a man who was still standing, but barely. He whispered to himself, this can't be what marriage is supposed to feel like. And that whisper was louder than anything he had said in years, because that whisper was truth. He realized he had been playing a role for so long that he forgot how to live honestly. He smiled when he was dying inside. He agreed when he wanted to scream. He gave when there was nothing left to give. And the world called him strong. But that wasn't strength. That was survival. The world loves quiet men because they don't complain. They don't cause trouble. They just carry the weight and keep moving. But what the world forgets is that quiet men break too. They just break in silence. When a man's peace depends on silence, he becomes his own prisoner. And no one can save him until he decides to speak again. That's what he began to understand. That his silence was never noble. It was fear. Fear of conflict. Fear of rejection. Fear of being misunderstood. But fear dressed up as patience still kills the same way. He had been living as a ghost in his own life. And the only way to come back to himself was to stop disappearing. So he started small. He spoke again. Not in anger, not in blame, but in truth, because truth doesn't destroy what's real. It only exposes what's fake, and that's when he finally saw it clearly. He hadn't lost his marriage. He had just stopped pretending it was still alive. The first time he spoke his truth. It wasn't loud. It wasn't angry. It was calm, steady, controlled, because real strength doesn't scream. It whispers with certainty. He told her how he felt, not to hurt, not to blame, just to finally be honest. He didn't expect her to understand. He just needed to stop pretending. For years, he thought speaking up would destroy everything, but silence had already done that. All he was doing now was telling the truth about what had already died. She looked at him with surprise, maybe even fear, because she could see it in his eyes. He was done negotiating his peace. That's what happens when a man finally wakes up. He stops trying to win arguments that don't matter. He stops begging to be seen. He stops apologizing for wanting peace. He didn't leave that night. He didn't slam doors or pack bags. He just stopped performing. He started living. He realized that marriage wasn't the enemy. Losing himself was, and for the first time in years, he slept peacefully, not because everything was fixed, but because he had finally stopped lying to himself. He learned something that every man eventually must. You can't save a relationship by killing yourself inside it. You can't fix a home that only one person is willing to maintain, and you can't find respect in a place where your silence is the requirement. So he began rebuilding. Not the marriage, not the image, but himself. He went back to the gym, not to look better, but to feel stronger. He started reading again. He started praying again. He reconnected with his friends, the ones who knew him before the silence. And slowly, he came back to life. Every day he spoke a little more. Every day he carried a little less. And every time he told the truth, he felt lighter. He didn't become bitter. He became clear. He didn't become selfish. He became balanced. He didn't become distant. He became free. Freedom doesn't mean walking away from everyone. It means walking toward yourself. He still loved her. But love without respect is just habit. And he refused to live by habit anymore. He realized that most men stay not because they're happy, but because they're afraid of starting over. Afraid of being judged. Afraid of failing publicly. But failure isn't when something ends. Failure is when you stay where you no longer grow. He once thought leaving meant losing. Now he knows it means choosing. Choosing himself. Choosing peace. Choosing life. When he stopped living for approval, he started living with intention. He began to feel something he hadn't felt in years: power. Not control over others, but control over himself. He understood that the quietest man in the room isn't weak. He's calculating. He's aware. He's learning what's worth speaking for, and what's worth walking away from. That's the kind of strength the world never sees, because it doesn't make noise. It doesn't demand validation. It just moves forward quietly, with purpose and clarity. He realized the only thing he ever needed to fix was his alignment. Once he found his center again, everything else stopped hurting. The arguments didn't matter. The labels didn't matter. The opinions didn't matter. He didn't need revenge. He didn't need closure. He just needed peace. And peace isn't found in other people. It's found in truth. When a man learns to tell the truth to himself, to others, and to the life he's built, that's when he becomes unstoppable. He stopped explaining himself to those who couldn't understand. He stopped defending his decisions to those who didn't have to live with them. He started leading again, not with ego, but with example. He showed his sons what calm leadership looks like. He showed his daughters what self-respect sounds like. He stopped trying to be perfect and started being present. That's the shift. When a man stops trying to be everything, he finally becomes something real. He doesn't hate marriage. He doesn't hate women. He just understands now that love is not ownership. It's partnership, and partnership only survives where truth can breathe. For years, he thought he was keeping the family together, but what he was really doing was holding himself hostage, trying to be the glue when no one cared if it stuck. Now, he lets people go with peace, because love that needs control isn't love. It's fear, and he's done living afraid. He still sits in his car sometimes, but now, it's different. He doesn't sit there to escape. He sits there to reflect, to breathe, to remind himself how far he's come. The same silence that once suffocated him now restores him. It's not a prison anymore. It's peace. He realized something simple but profound. Silence is only painful when it hides the truth. Once you speak, silence becomes sacred again. He drives home now with calm in his chest. Not tension, not fear, just peace. The kind of peace that comes when you stop betraying yourself. And that's the truth every man needs to hear. You don't owe the world your silence. You owe yourself your voice. Because silence isn't strength, it's survival. And survival isn't living. So speak, even if your voice shakes, even if no one listens, because the moment you speak, you're no longer a prisoner of your own fear. The world might not applaud you, they might not understand you, but you will sleep peacefully. And that's what freedom feels like. The quietest man in the room is not weak. He's just finished with pretending. He's done performing. He's finally free. And for the first time in years, when he walks through that front door, he doesn't pause in the car anymore. He walks straight in, because the man who used to need 5 minutes of silence has become the silence itself, calm, strong, and untouchable.